I didn't. Just people talked about it. As an excellent.
Yeah, this is.
Oh, yes, I just. Like feels weirder and like.
All right. I think we're right at 3:30, so I want to make sure we get started on time. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Jones, one of the co-presidents for the Society of Duke Fellows, alongside my fellow co-president, Yvonne, currently manning the Zoom in the front row. Before we begin, I just want to extend some thank yous to some really important people that helped us get here. First of all, our incredible graduate student organizing team. We couldn't have done this without them, as well as all of our speakers, both student presenters and our keynote coming up at the end. And of course, all the members of the Society of Duke Fellows who make this community what it is. A special thank you also goes to our colleagues at the Graduate School for co-sponsoring this event, particularly Assistant Deans Dr. Melissa Bostrom and Dr. Hugh Crumley. Let's all take a moment to give a well-deserved round of applause for everyone who helped bring this event to be. All right, we have an exciting lineup of talks ahead, and we're very excited to share them all with you. With that, I'm going to turn things over to a member of our illustrious planning committee to kick things off.
All right. First, we hear from Wei Hanshu, a second-year master's in computer science.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wei Han, and I'm a second-year master student from Department of Computer Science. Today, I'm excited to explore next-generation music generation model and human AI co-creation in arts with everyone. So currently, there are some state-of-the-art music generation models that you might be familiar with. The first one is Music Gen from Meta. In this model, you can generate music based on textual or audio prompts, which makes customized music generation somewhat possible. And another startup that you might be more familiar with is the Suno AI. This is a startup that deploy an application that can help users to generate music from audio, from textual input as well as a visual input, which makes this creative expression more accessible to people from different domains. So with those music generation models, what can we do? The first interesting application is the film music generation. Consider you take a silent movie, but you need some music to accompany it to make it more immersive and engaging. So music generation models that with textual or audio input can help this happen with a more advanced audiovisual alignment and correspondence under the hood. Another interesting application is the music therapy domain. Researchers just connect music with some body sensories. This can help you help the researchers to guide a specific medical status for the patients. This is widely used in a highly explored research area. With pre-trained music generation models, how can we make music generation models like a copilot for creative expression? Jackbox is a new application from OpenAI where you can generate music with textual or instrumental or vocal inputs to generate music. This can also make it like an iterative process, which mimic how human beings generate music in real life. Another example is the videos on the bottom right. Consider you are in a concert and there's a pianist. The pianist is start to play a music, but there's only one music in piano track. Then the AI models kick in to make the music one track piano track to multi-track. But unfortunately, due to the nature of transformers, which is the backbone of music generation models, the transformers are trained to mimic the probability distribution of the training data set, which means if we wanted to use this, it's highly likely that to generate music will mimic the training data distribution, which raised a huge problem called style mimicry problem, not only new music generation models, but in a broader generative AI domain. So researchers are trying to mimic this problem with different kind of method. A really interesting method is called perturbation and adversarial training, which means researchers are adding some perturbation techniques on the music to eliminate the style mimicry problem. At the same time, it leverages a powerful backbone like music gen to ensure the audio qualities and textual or any kind of input conditioned inputs to the generate music. So at present, the music generation models is very powerful, but there's due to the style mimicry concern and other copyright concern, we as computer scientists, science researchers, and artists should work together to make a new and next generation music generation co-creation happens. Thank you for joining me this journey today. Thank you.
All right, next we hear, thank you, Wei Han. Next we hear from Daniel Reich, a second-year PhD in sociology.
Work. Sick. Okay, hello. Today I'm going to be talking about moral identity and its relationship with moral behavior. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to start off by asking you all a question. Could you just raise your hand if you think you're a good person? Great. So our society revolves around, you know, us, the people around us being decent people, at least most of the time. Maybe be wary of if anyone didn't raise their hands. But yeah, so most of us think we're good people, but does that correlate to our actual behavior? That's what I'm interested in. So the so all the data I'm going to be referencing here comes from the Measuring Morality Project from Steve Vasey in Duke's Department of Sociology. It was a nationally representative survey in 2012, about 1,500 participants, and it measures a bunch of morality-related constructs, as the name would suggest. And the moral identity, at the beginning I asked if you think you're a good person. That's a pretty crude measure of moral identity. If you do anything with scale development, you would see why that's a problem. But social psychologists have created a better scale where they show people all these traits that we think generally of as associating with being a good person. And they ask people the extent to which they value having those traits. So a higher score on the scale is you value being a good person more. And as we saw at the beginning of the talk, most people think they're good people. Most people value being a good person. The midpoint of the scale is like 4, and you can see that almost everyone's above that. But does that translate into their behavior? So we're going to do a little thought experiment. This side of the room, you guys are going to be participant A's. This is what the people in the Measuring Morality data set did. So I'm just going to walk you through that. You guys are A's. This hef's B's. Pretend A's, when you walked in, I told you there'd be a raffle at the end of my talk where we draw for a prize of $10. You each get 10 tickets. Each ticket's an entry in the raffle. B's, sorry, you get nothing. You should have sat on that side of the room. But I tell the A's that you can give anywhere between 0 to 10 tickets to a random B. And I'll take care of it. You don't have to go find a B. I got you. How much would you give? Well, the fair amount to give is 5 tickets. That way an A has 5, a B has a 5, everyone's happy. And in the Measuring Morality data, 75% of participants gave at least 5 tickets. So very high levels of cooperation. That's really good. And if you break it down by moral identity, here we have moral identity on the x-axis and probability of giving a fair distribution on the y-axis. You can see as people, you know, more strongly value being a good person, they are more likely to give. But what I didn't tell you is that in the Measuring Morality data, half of the A's were told that the raffle was for $10. The other half were told that the raffle was for $500. How do you think that affects their giving? So in the $10 condition, you'll remember that 75% gave a fair allotment, while in the $500 condition, only 65% did, which still is a pretty high level of cooperation. But again, we're interested in how that relates to their moral identity. So here's the same graph before, but split between conditions. So you see at the lower end of the moral identity scale, there's practically no difference between the $10 and $500 conditions. People who don't think they're good people just won't act like good people most of the time. But what's interesting is when you get near the top of the scale, even the people who think they're very good people, when the reward size is higher, are much less likely to give. It's like 15% less. So all that to say, thinking you're a good person is not the same as actually being a good person. There are situational factors that will lead you to act in your own self-interest instead of the good of others. And if you truly care about being a good person, you need to consider those and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we have Maddie Siegel, a 30th PhD student in mechanical engineering and material science.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about how light-sensitive goo can change lives by eliminating unnecessary surgeries. So to get us started, we're going to talk about two different cases. First, we have a man that has severe intestinal pain because he has an inflammatory bowel disease. His doctors decide to implant a metal stent in his intestines to relieve some of his symptoms. In our second case, we have a young boy who's fractured his leg, and his doctors decide to implant a metal fixation device in order to promote proper bone healing. So my question is, what do these two patients have in common? And the answer is they both have metal implants. And unfortunately, both of them are going to need two surgeries. First, to place their implant, and a second surgery to remove their implant once the treatment period is over. So my question is, how can we eliminate that second surgery? And the answer is using degradable materials. So if instead of making these implants out of metal, which would stay in your body forever, if we made these implants out of degradable materials that could break down in the body, we would be able to eliminate that second surgery. Specifically, I'm trying to achieve this using degradable polymers. So at this point, you might be wondering, what's a polymer? Well, a polymer is a material that's made of individually repeating units called monomers. So if we think of a monomer as one person, and we get a bunch of people all together, ask them to stand in a line and hold hands, that forms a polymer. And interestingly enough, if we change out the monomers, we can actually make different polymers that have different properties and behaviors using the same exact techniques. We can also use some chemistry magic to substitute out some of the monomers, but not all of them, in order to make what's called a copolymer, where we have a mixture of monomers within the same structure. So using all these techniques, we can create a library of materials that we can call upon to meet different medical needs based on their properties and behavior. And here you see a video of me actually synthesizing one of these polymers in my lab. So the most important property of these materials is that they actually degrade. So if you take a chunk of polymer and you put it in a solution of water, which we know there's a bunch of water throughout our bodies, and you let it sit for some amount of time, that material actually breaks down. From a chemical standpoint, if we think about our polymer chain, exposing that chain to water actually makes that polymer break back down into its monomer units, which the body can absorb and process. Another really interesting property of this material is that it's light sensitive, specifically to UV light. So if we look on the left, this is how the material behaves before being exposed to UV light. You can see that it's kind of this thick, gooey substance. And as soon as we apply light to it, it instantly solidifies. And while I see this as a really cool transition, we can actually leverage this to make geometrically complex three-dimensional parts using a type of 3D printing called digital light processing, or DLP 3D printing. The way these printers work is as follows. On the bottom, you have a projector that acts as a light source to cure the resin. In the center, you have the resin vat, which is what holds your light-sensitive polymer. And on the top, you have a build tray where the 3D part will be made. The way this works is the build tray moves into the resin vat, and the light turns on and cures one layer of the polymer at a time. And this repeats over and over in order to form a three-dimensional structure in a layer-by-layer fashion. Now, this is what that looks like in real life, and this is a sped up video, but we can see that a solid is really pulled out of this thin, shallow pool of liquid resin in what almost looks like a fake magic trick. But I promise you, it is real. And using these techniques, I've been able to 3D print different implants, and here are examples of 4 different stents that I've designed and 3D printed with my own degradable light-sensitive material. And the best part about this is these 3D printing techniques automatically have customizability built into them, so we can make these implants specific for each and every patient. So circling back to our original question, how can we eliminate second surgeries? Well, if we use degradable materials to manufacture the implants, we can completely eliminate the need for that second surgery because the implant can break down in the body instead of needing to be removed. So to conclude, light-sensitive goo does have the potential to change lives by cutting the amount of surgery that patients have to have in half. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. And next we have Ankita Gupta, a fifth-year PhD student in environment.
Hey, so when we picture agricultural land, we often imagine endless fields and large rows of crops, something like this. It's a system designed for maximum yield and efficiency. But today, let me take you somewhere quite different, a place where biodiversity and agriculture can intersect in surprising ways. So this is Kera. This is a heavily farmed district in Western India. Every winter, thousands of migratory birds arrive here. And interestingly, they don't just go to the large protected wetlands. They also visit small seasonal ponds which depend on irrigation overflow or rainfall to exist. These ponds are used for irrigation, cultivation, household water use, for washing of clothes, even brick making. And yet they support a surprisingly rich diversity of birds. And that's what drew me in. But let's zoom out a little bit. Why are we talking about agriculture? So agriculture is a dominant global land use, and it's one of the major causes of wetland loss. This graph here shows us the dramatic rise in agricultural land. In addition to this, irrigation is also a powerful force in reshaping landscapes. This map here shows us the global footprint of irrigation. In places like India, more than 50% of the crop land is actually irrigated, including in my study area in Kera. So agricultural areas in Kera often typically look like this, where canals have brought water to the region almost year-round. Of course, this is great for agriculture and for food security, but this also alters the natural cycles of flooding and drying of wetlands, which can have unintended consequences for biodiversity. So we asked, how does the seasonal variation in availability of water affect birds? And do these small overlooked ponds still matter? To find this out, we conducted surveys across more than 70 wetlands in Kera district of Gujarat across 2 years. We recorded the species that we saw, how many birds we saw, and also the types of birds that we are seeing, for example, piscivores, insectivores, or grazers. We also use satellite imagery to track the extent of water and vegetation present in these wetlands across seasons. What did we find? So even small ponds, some which were actually no bigger than this room that we are sitting in, supported unique bird communities. Overall, we recorded 145 species, out of which 8 were vulnerable or near threatened. Isn't that remarkable for a landscape which is not even considered valuable for conservation? These small community-managed ponds are quietly doing very important ecological work. One of the strongest patterns that I found was that wetlands, as expected, the larger wetlands were important for bird diversity. But it was the presence of vegetation in this wetlands which, despite the size of the wetland, supported more birds, both in terms of the number of species and the number of birds. So plants such as water lily, water chestnut, or emergent grasses provides food, shelter, and structure, which can transform even the smallest ponds into very high-value habitats. So it's not just about the availability of water in the landscape, it's also about the quality of the habitat. Additionally, the link between diversity and size also varied by the season and the type of birds. For instance, fish-eating birds like cormorants, which are the blackbirds shown here, were more strongly associated with the larger wetlands. whereas generalist species, which had more flexible diets, were also found in the small ponds. So that tells us that it's important to protect wetlands of different size and types to support unique bird communities throughout the year. And understanding these patterns has key implications for management of these landscapes, both for human use and for biodiversity. We often think of conservation as something which happens at a grand scale, in national parks, protected reserves, or in large forested areas. But even small wetlands such as these can support rich bird communities and contribute to regional biodiversity. So recognizing and supporting these systems can be a realistic and inclusive way of managing biodiversity in working landscapes where we can't make protected areas. So when we talk about conservation, let's widen our lens to include small ponds tucked within farmlands, and also to talk about marshy areas beside highways. When we do this, we might find that these spaces bring more than we think and expand our idea of where conservation happens and who it can include. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. We'll take a brief intermission until 4. So, yeah.
I think so. We were like the first one. Yeah, it'll be this one. So. Yeah. Like, it happened again.
Right now. Just a laptop. You might put it on top of the. Like, fit it in here. All right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started again. First up, we have Ye Chung Liu, a first-year master's student in quantitative management.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yicheng Liu from Fuqua School of Management. I'm going to start my PhD journey in strategic management at University of Toronto this fall. Today, I want to talk about something that has impacted all of us, National Institutes of Health. For decades, NIH has been bedrock for biomedical research. It grants power to thousands of labs, fund the training for future scientists, and shapes the direction of medical breakthroughs. However, a few weeks before, we all received that email from Duke's president's office. NIH funding for Duke is down by nearly $200 million. No new labs, no renovation, no new hearing, no raises. It's not just the Duke's problem. It's a warning sign across the country. So this makes me reflect even more deeply on the question that's been at the heart of my research. What happens when government support for science shifts dramatically? There are two kinds of research. Safe research is grounded in what we've already known. So they building on existing knowledge. Well, risky and uncertain research explores new, unproven, untested ideas. So the question is, can public funding spark bold innovation, or does it just play it safe? Prior research shows that federal funding influences the rate and direction of innovation. Another research in 2022 shows that public agencies prefer less risky research proposals due to predictable results and accountability in the use of public funds. However, another paper argues that government is willing to take on extreme risks in the case of clean energy technology. So I wonder, what about in life science? Here came a rare moment. Between 2015 and 2023, the Congress increased the NIH funding for Alzheimer's disease from 6 million to 3.8 billion. And it's not just a growth, it's a moonshot. So this surge made me wonder, the scientist, how does this surge influence the behavior of the scientists? So are they more cautious about are they more cautious to secure the funding, or are they willing to take on more creative risk that they couldn't afford before? To explore this, I compared the NIH budget and spending of Alzheimer's disease with another high risk, high uncertainty field, the cancer genomics, where the public fund remains stable over the years. So this natural experiment allowed me to isolate the impact of the surge in funding. To measure this, I use disruption index. This index measures how much a research paper breaks away from old ideas and replaces it with the new direction. My hypothesis is increased public funding leads to a higher incidence of high risk, high reward scientific innovation. As we see NIH funding cuts sweep through institutions like Duke, we need to ask, are we funding what's safe or what's transformational? Are we brave enough to fund the unknown? Feel free to contact me and find more information on the fantastic Fuqua Strategy Department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chong. Next up, we have Ruth Farrinder, a second-year PhD student in biomedical engineering.
All right, today I'm going to talk to you about brain-computer interfaces for epilepsy monitoring. But first, we should understand what epilepsy is and what are the challenges for treatments. Suppose that you're the conductor of a large orchestra. Every instrument is playing something slightly different, and it's your job to make sure that each one comes together at the right time and the right volume to create music. You need to be able to detect when an instrument is off tempo and provide the right cues to bring them back to the group. If you've ever heard a professional orchestra perform, you know that the conductor does this very well and the musicians are very good at following the cues. But what if the orchestra had no conductor? They'd probably sound pretty good most of the time because they're good musicians, but if someone did lose the beat, it could devolve very quickly. If they can't follow the cues of the conductor, they'll follow their neighbors. So if one person is off tempo, it can quickly spread to the entire orchestra until it just becomes noise. And at this point, it becomes very difficult to pinpoint the source of the confusion and correct it. This is analogous to the epileptic brain. The neurons might be working together most of the time, but if even a small set of neurons starts misfiring, it can quickly spread to the entire brain and cause a seizure. We know that epilepsy is one of the most common neurological disorders in the world. And while there are a lot of seizure medications available, about 1 in 3 epilepsy patients don't respond to any medication. That's over 1 million people in the US alone. So what can we do to help this population? We can surgically remove the brain tissue from which seizures are originating, but this requires very careful planning to be successful. And by successful, I mean permanently eliminating seizures in that patient. Going back to the orchestra example, we need to detect which instrument is losing the beat and propagating that error to the rest of the orchestra. And this is where brain-computer interfaces come into play. So, like a computer, the brain sends information electrically, so we can easily link the two with a conductive metal contact called an electrode. Prior to surgery, to figure out where seizures are coming from, surgeons will place several recording probes, each with about 8 to 15 electrodes, throughout the brain to record for about 2 weeks. We can think of each electrode as a recording microphone that we place somewhere in the orchestra to detect which instrument is off tempo. If these microphones are too sparsely placed, say we're only recording from the violins, or if we're not recording for a long enough time, we can't reliably pinpoint the source of the problem. Sadly, this is the case for about 40 to 50% of epilepsy surgeries, meaning that after 2 weeks of pre-surgical monitoring, plus the surgery itself, the patient is still experiencing seizures. So my project in Dr. Viventi's lab is to increase the number of electrodes on a single recording device from 8 to 15 to 60 to 80, and to do so in a wireless implantable form factor so that we can record for weeks to months while the patients go about their normal lives. But how can we increase the number of metal contacts by several fold without also increasing the size of the device? We can use microfabrication strategies to pattern metal onto a thin, flexible polymer, similar to how the computer in your phone is made to fit many complex features into a very small area. And because we're patterning on a flexible polymer, we can then coil that device into the probe that we need for depth recording. And we know that it will be mechanically matched to the neural tissue so that it can move with the brain. Finally, instead of running wires outside of the head to connect to a computer, we can embed wires within the polymer to connect to a wireless chip. And instead of encapsulating in a bulky metal packaging like what is currently used in implantable devices, we can use the polymer to encapsulate the chip and implant it between the skull and the scalp. With the relay station outside of the head, we can access information wirelessly. So the goal is to create a recording device that will enable surgeons to more accurately pinpoint the origin of seizures and reduce the burden on patients through a seamless brain-computer interface. So I want to thank my advisor and my lab mentors, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Ruth. Next up, we will have Tara Wells, a fifth-year PhD student in classical studies.
few weeks ago, I visited Ellis Island in New York City. The main building there is now a museum, but from 1892 through 1954, operated as a port of entry for millions of American immigrants. Walking through the galleries, I was just awestruck by reading people's stories and learning more about what immigrants had to go through, both there at Ellis Island and getting there, like the uncomfortable traveling conditions, physical examinations, mental inspections, and just general bureaucracy, and under constant scrutiny, which didn't stop at Ellis Island. Rather, it continued in their new communities where they faced continued prejudice and discrimination and had to adapt as best as they could to fit in and be more accepted. One way people did that was through names, whether taking on an entirely new name or changing theirs to just sound more English, for example. As we see in this 1914 political cartoon, the person has not only changed their name, but their entire business, basically, minimizing their ethnicity so that they can hopefully draw in customers who would otherwise be prejudiced towards them. But this is not a tactic that was invented in 19th century America. It stretches back as far as the ancient Mediterranean. So here's a map just for larger geographical context, but I'm focusing on Greece, which had a particularly large population of immigrants from Phoenicia. They didn't have an Ellis Island processing experience in the same way, but did face similar prejudices and discrimination, so also had to assimilate enough to survive and both be part of their community, but also maintain their original identity as much as they could. Tombstones are an excellent form of evidence for that, because they, if something is on a tombstone, it indicates that that person or the deceased person or their close loved ones deliberately chose that information to commemorate them forever, and often for public display. This is a major sacred road in Athens, Greece, called a Keramikos cemetery. These are very fancy tombstones, but there were lots of different types, larger, more detailed ones like these, smaller, simpler ones. This is one of my personal favorites for a Phoenician immigrant, also found in the Keramikos. So a Phoenician buried among Greeks. And this is not the only example of that. This one is really cool, though, because it's bilingual with both Greek and Phoenician text on it. So here's a full view and just a zoom in of the text and imagery. But mainly, I want to focus on the names in the inscription. And don't worry, you don't need to be able to read these languages to see that the languages, there's two different languages, the top two lines being Greek and the bottom two being Phoenician. Again, text you don't need to be able to read. I just want to highlight the names and the ways that they are changed. There's 3 different methods used here. So the boxes in red, the first person's name. In the Greek, we have Antipatros, and the Phoenician, we have Shem. Totally different, no correlation. The second name's in blue. We have Greek Aphrodisios, which is actually a translation of Phoenician Abdastart. The third set, in purple, is in Phoenician Domsolo, and to make it Greek, it simply adds a Greek ending of Domsolos. So 3 different methods for changing names. Entirely different one, translating one, or just a little bit of a change. Which brings me back to the beginning of my presentation, because that just scratches the surface of all of the adaptive strategies of immigrants. I titled it, How Deep Are the Roots of Anti-Immigrant Discrimination? But I've determined that that's not really the question here. Rather, what we're looking at is how immigrants adapted and responded to the discrimination, because name changes are indicative of that discrimination and other adaptive strategies, but they are not that selves, they're discrimination. So in, sorry, in seeing those, what we're really seeing is the immigrants' resilience. So a better question is probably, how have immigrants since antiquity negotiated identity in response to discrimination? The answers are endless, as is their resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And lastly, we'll have Roberta Romano, a last year master's student in theological studies.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. So, what has mysticism got to do with politics? This is my research question. But first, what is mysticism? Something religious, private, esoteric, and impractical activity which does not fit with our busy, ordinary life? And what about politics? At its best, politics is the process by which we shape our coexistence and pursue common good. But far more often, even in democracies, mysticism is the realm of power grabs, divisiveness, manipulation. So what has mysticism got to do with politics? Let's consider two premises. Premise A, there is no real division between matter and spirit. Whether one believes in one God, creator of heaven and earth, or whether one belongs to a non-monotheistic spiritual traditions, or even whether your framework is more aligned with quantum physics and relativity, we may share the belief that we are spiritual beings, energy, having a physical experience. We are the meeting place of two orders. Christians might call this theosis, which is a Greek word that means divinization, is that process of connection between human and divine. So mysticism then is the path to that place of intersection. It has been defined as the art of exploring and experiencing unity with reality. So by cleansing the doors of perception, mystical practices can take us to that place of unity. Unity between us and the transcendent, unity between all of us, and then unity with everything that exists. Premise B, existence ontology, so that means core identity, is unity. Even this can be supported both theologically and scientifically. And it's also interdependence and infinite diversity of expressions. And I believe this is so because freedom is a marker of unconditional love, and unconditional love is the frequency of the universe. Then, if A and B are true, once we awaken to this unity, that continue to exist even when it is ignored or misunderstood, then we might want to align our belief systems, our attitudes, habits, behaviors to that same frequency, so that we can be co-creator of a reality of love and express ourselves, our unique self. And this is where mysticism meets politics. Let me explain. If the identity of reality is one and interdependent, then our dominant political systems, which are grounded on the idea that you must lose for me to win, that you must have less for me to have more, then those are just fake news. They're constructs. And if you ask me, they're quite messy ones because they have not been able to ensure the majority of the world's population's dignity and well-being. They have been responsible for massive killings and abuses, and even for ecological destructions. Instead, if I receive what I give, if I thrive when you thrive, if I win when you win, if I am because you are, then politics should take much more seriously a vision of unity, of equity, justice, nonviolence, mutual support, cooperation. Because this is my life as much as it is yours. This is the ocean life as it is ours. This is the president's life as it is the refugees, entangled. So if we are not interested in a life that is dominated by fear, grounded on the illusion of separation, then let's turn to mysticism. Let's close our eyes, be still, take a deep breath, contemplate a starry night or a blooming dogwood, sing, dance, pray, engage in any spiritual practice that can bring us closer to that place of unity. And let's act from there. Let's live from there, fully. Experience the change that we wish to bring, nurture a new political imagination where violence is no longer an option, where inequality is not convenient for anyone, and where win-win solutions are actually possible. In a time dominated by religious moralism, which is divisive and self-righteous, and on the other hand, a public space which is dominated by materialism and capitalism, I would suggest this a third way of sacred living. It has been done before, grounding socio-political action on a unifying spiritual vision. Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, Mandela, Howard Thurman, Dorothy Day, Gandhi, Oscar Romero, just to name a few. I believe it's our turn now. This is our call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Let's give another hand to all our wonderful speakers who came out today. And now we'll have another brief intermission before our keynote speaker. Thank you.
I just want to thank the student speakers one more time for their fantastic talks. Now we're going to close out with our keynote talk by Dr. Lenora Helm-Hammonds. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lenora Helm-Hammonds, an award-winning jazz musician, composer, educator, and researcher whose work bridges performance, academia, innovation, and jazz education. A former U.S. Jazz Ambassador and full-time Fulbright Senior Music Specialist, Dr. Hammonds has spent 4 decades as a recording artist, composer, and band leader. She has performed with band greats such as Ron Carter, Branford Marsalis, Gary Allen, and her acclaimed ensemble, Tribe Jazz Orchestra, redefines the landscape of large jazz ensembles by championing gender diversity. In addition to her prolific career as a performer, Dr. Hammonds is a dedicated educator and leader in jazz studies. She currently serves as the Dean of the Professional Education Division at Berklee College of Music and has held academic leadership roles for over 20 years. Her research explores vocal jazz pedagogy, digital humanities, and intercultural learning, and she has published extensively on these topics. Her upcoming textbook, Sing Vocal Jazz, Teach Vocal Jazz, will serve as a cornerstone in the field of jazz education. Dr. Helm-Hammonds is also a dynamic speaker, which you will about to find out, sharing her insights on jazz and communication in forums worldwide, including her TEDx Berkeley Boston talk, What Jazz Improv Can Teach You About Communication. She continues to shape the future of jazz through her performances, scholarship, and advocacy. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lenora Helm-Hammonds.
Hey, how y'all doing? Good. You sound kind of quiet. It's been a lot of information quickly, and you're shy? Hello. I'm really glad to be here with you, and I'm excited. That was quite a generous introduction, but I want to take you quickly through a few things that I hope will be interesting to you about communication and its correlation to jazz improvisation. And we're going to start with a breath, just a breath. So if you would with me, take a breath. I want you to take a really deep breath in, and you're going to exhale for longer than the time that it took you to inhale. Yeah? Ready? And. Something as simple as a breath can bring you to an awareness of yourself, how you feel at that moment, and give you a strategy and a tool to use when you need to change your mindset, your emotional point set, anything where you feel separate from yourself, when you feel separate from calm, when you feel separate from ease, when you feel separate from flow. Just breathe. I learned this as a jazz musician, particularly as a singer, because singing, you need to have the vehicle of breath to do everything with your instrument, with the lyric, with the story. It starts with breathing. And when we interact with others, we also can use that same strategy. When we want to know what to do when we don't know what to say, when we don't know how to think about something that's going on, our brains are triggered when we feel anxious or fearful or upset, or we feel like we're in a different environment than is normal for us. And your breath is something that you can always depend on. So that's one tool. If you didn't get anything else from my talk today, you have that about breath. So, want to get along, use improvisation was the name of my talk. because, am I doing the wrong way? The other one. Directions are good, important. When I saw these flags as a child, when I would watch TV with my mom in the morning and the Good Morning America show, I would say, Mom, I'm going to go to those countries that are represented by all of those flags. And she would say, girl, eat your oatmeal. But I was intrigued that those flags represented places in the world where people lived represented by those flags. And I wanted to know, who are they? What do they do? Do they eat oatmeal for breakfast? My dad was a painter, an oil painter, and he would often paint beautiful landscapes of Africa, as well as women adorned with jewelry and headdresses. And I thought this was something really magnificent as a child. I would sit on his lap and listen to jazz music, his favorite music, as he painted. So my foray into being a jazz musician came about with these fond memories of my dad. Well, at 6 years old, I thought a really good idea was taking a picture of a painting my father had made of my mom to school for show and tell. And my first grade teacher really didn't agree with me. I thought, how magnificent for me to share a picture that my father painted. It was a life-size painting of my mom, and she looked beautiful. She was reading a newspaper, smoking a cigarette, but she was bare-breasted. My teacher, when she saw this, now I opened the newspaper long and wide like this. It was one of the newspapers in Chicago, where I grew up, and she gasped and she snatched the paper from me and she ordered me to my seat. And I didn't understand what was going on. I thought, why is she treating me like that? I wasn't able to continue interacting with the rest of the students. And later that day, she pinned a note to my blouse that I had to take home, and I was suspended from school, and I could not come back until one of my parents came to school. My father did come to school and explained that they taught us that seeing women bare-breasted was not a bad thing, that women could be adorned with jewelry and headdress, and this is the way they did it in that culture. And understanding that it was beauty and not something bad, I was very confused by my teacher's behavior, but it was my first memory of shame. Once my father did go to school and explain that to my teacher, I was allowed to go back to school, but my 6-year-old brain still had to negotiate my feelings about myself and that my family was somehow inappropriate. My mom and dad were very different from each other. My mom pretty much had her family and the people that she interacted with her large family of 6 siblings, and they all had lots of children. And my father, he really was an artist at heart. And for the very first part of my life, he would paint, but he would always talk about books and places in other countries. And this idea came about with my stories and my conversations with my dad and my mother about what it was like to move around Chicago, the south side of Chicago, but then go into areas that had other populations. Chicago was very segregated, and we weren't always around people who looked like us. And so the thought about othering, the way that we can see someone who is not like us and make a decision. The description here and the very quick definition, view or treat a person or group of people as intrinsically different from an alien to oneself. I think that's the way my brother treated my sister and I when we would try to play with his Hot Wheels car tracks and so forth. Or for me, it was someone who didn't like science and math as a nerd that I was in school. But we all do this when we find that someone doesn't think like us or move around the world like us or read the same books or like the same movies. So othering is a principle that may cause us not to communicate with each other. My mom was a twin, and her twin sister, Vivian, my mother Vera, my mother is on the left, were part of a set of 44 twins who were selected to market twin Zephyr trains. My mom and her twin sister were the only African-American twins that were part of this marketing campaign. So when I saw this picture, I was like, wow, that's such an amazing thing that my mom was part of history for Chicago, the trains that went between Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Chicago. When I showed this picture to my mother, the only thing she could think about was how people would do an othering kind of thing with her sister and compare them. And she said, I hate that my knees were always knocked. You can't see it in this picture, but in another picture from this particular event, you see it. And I thought, wow, why would that be something that would remind you and think of this event? We all do those things, yes? It could be an extraordinary event happening for us, but we cannot get our mind unwrapped around the things that make us feel different or other than people. That's them with all the 44 sets of twins. Quite an interesting historical moment. Why are the things that make us think about other people, why might they be important? Because there are areas of our thought processes when we engage with other people that bring us to stop or start conversations, that bring us to create a barrier, whether that barrier is physical or language. I studied something quite by mistake called intercultural maturity that I found fascinating because it is an aspect of intercultural competence, but you cannot be interculturally competent until you are interculturally mature. So what does that mean? There are 3 domains of these behaviors: the cognitive domain, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So what are we aware of when we're around other people? If you're standing in this line at Starbucks and there's someone in front of you who is not one of your friends or someone that you know, what do you start thinking about them? Oh, I don't like that coat. I wish they wouldn't take too long. Extra foam, they're just in my way. Interpersonal is how we interact with other people. And a lot of times it's more activated when you are in interdomestic or international, or international communities. Intrapersonal is what you are aware of as you're interacting. These 3 domains have a trajectory of development for all of us. And mostly it's important in college environments that you have the opportunity to activate these areas on a beginning level or initial level, intermediate, and advanced. So what does it look like and feel like? Acceptance, creativity, openness, curiousness, empathy, vulnerability, and trust. Improvisation in jazz requires the same thing. So jazz improvisation is a concept in jazz where the myth is that you just make it up. If we have any musicians in the audience? Yeah, a few, 1, 2, yes. So if you've ever listened to jazz music, if you've ever learned and trained in jazz music, one of the things that scares people the most is that you have to be there in the moment and make it up. But you're not making it up out of thin air. It's not in a vacuum. It's really math. And jazz improvisation is one of the areas where if you're not open and you're not vulnerable and you don't allow yourself to be accepting of what your bandmates do, you might find yourself being shut down, unavailable to interact with your bandmates, and not performing in a way that's interesting to others. One of the things I loved about jazz improvisation is that you could be very authentic. You could be very curious. The same way that you can be when you're working or around or engaging with people who are different from you. Did I go the wrong way again? My husband likes to improvise with houses. So in the top left corner, that's the original house that he worked on over in Crowsdale. That's not far here from Durham. I could not believe that the house ended up looking like the one in the bottom left, your bottom right. How could he see that? How did he know what to do? He totally changed the way the house looked, presented, gutted the entire house, and came up with this. I call him the John Coltrane of improvisation. John Coltrane is a master jazz musician, no longer with us, but was an elder in the music that created an entire way to think about music that was very connected to math. When you improvise, you bring your whole self with your understanding, but you allow, there's an allowing that happens. So if we go back to those areas of cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal domains, I'll give you a story that is an example of jazz improvisation and jazz musicians that overlay into intercultural maturity. If you've ever heard of a pianist named Herbie Hancock, he's a jazz pianist, but was a member in his early years of the Miles Davis Band, the Miles Davis Quintet. And they were on the stage and they were playing, they were jamming, and he thought he was really doing something, and he got lost. He froze. He played a wrong chord. Now, Miles Davis was a very iconic musician, but he was known to be a little ratchet, for lack of a better word. He would say whatever, whenever, and sometimes you would not be saved from an embarrassing moment. Herbie Hancock froze. He wasn't sure what would happen. Would Miles Davis be accepting? Would he cover him? What would the other bandmates in the... Now this is, although I'm speaking about it a little slowly, this is split-second decision-making. Miles Davis, instead of continuing with what would have been the next chord to play, would have clashed with Herbie Hancock's, I'm going to get some water and keep talking, would have clashed with Herbie Hancock's wrong note. But instead of exposing his wrong note, he played a note that would fit and work. I guess I don't have water in here. I guess I'll have to just really hope I don't choke. I'm okay. I thought I put water in there coming out of my car. So Miles Davis played a better chord. He had to think right in the moment, and he played a better chord that worked with Herbie Hancock's wrong note. How can we use this example? How do you cover someone who's on your team and you're in leadership? Do you expose them? Do you throw them under the bus? Or do you allow yourself to be aware in that moment that something happened that shouldn't be happening? And though they did something different and unusual and unacceptable and not customary in that moment, could you take the idea of how you're feeling, your own personal, thank you so much, your own personal feelings, and think wide across the bandstand and across the audience and play and do something different that shows your interpersonal awareness and skills? We can all use these. You can improvise every day. How do I improvise if I'm not a musician? Well, have you ever taken, raise your hand, have you ever taken a way home, a route home that is different from your usual and customary way of going home? Yeah? Good. The others who didn't raise their hand, you wouldn't raise your hand anyway, right? Well, we do this moment to moment. Maybe we get to a store and we can't have hazelnut in our coffee, or we get to a restaurant and they don't have the things we need and want for the meal we were expecting. My husband orders the same meal every time he goes to this restaurant. He gets the same steak. They bring him his drink when he sits down, and that drives me nuts. I want to say to him, improvise. You can improvise too. And this skill, sometimes it's second nature. But if you deliberately think about improvisation as a tool to use when you encounter a group, a setting, an environment, a new job, a new way of moving into a new neighborhood, you can use improvisation, a way that you don't customarily do something, as a way, as an entree to communication. So that's all I have for you, but I will take questions if you have some. Thank you. Okay, who are the speakers? Raise your hand if you were a speaker here. Awesome. How did it feel? How many times in the talk did you improvise? 6 or 7, yeah? And what were you present to when you had to improvise in that way? What were you present to? What were you aware of as you were improvising? No one else would know. Yes, that's the secret. No one else will know that you messed up there, because if you have control and command of your particular topic, they wouldn't know. But just in that split second, you had to show confidence, you were vulnerable, you had to be open, and you had to accept where you were at the moment. Those are amazing skills that you take into your life and into your work. Thank you. Anyone else want to share about their talk?
I had a question.
Okay.
So when I do occasionally jam with some friends, I guess one thing is like the dynamic of like someone has to know that they messed up to improvise, kind of. So what's the, like, in your experience as a musician? I mean, of course, everyone's probably extremely talented in what they're doing, but what's
Sometimes
sort of
not.
yeah, like what's the inverse of sort of like one like what does improvisation look like as sort of like a response to that? I don't know. Is it the same sort of principle?
So let me just make sure I understand your question. So someone's performing, they messed up, and no one else responds with acknowledging that they messed up.
I guess like when I'm like with people who none of us are particularly good, someone might just be in the wrong key the whole time. So
That has happened.
yeah.
Yeah, that has happened to me.
Don't advise to just like adjust to the person when it sort of seems, when I think about it, it's like it really should be all of us because everyone else seems to know.
Right, you used to screech to a stop, right? Well, it depends on if you're on stage in front of an audience. If you're practicing, you can kind of say, yo, yeah, can we start over or whatever. But if you're in front of an audience and you are in the wrong place, it's totally wrong. A lot of things can happen. What is your cognitive set point there, right? Like an emotional intelligence set point. Would you say, wow, she's really in the wrong place? Especially if they're oblivious. Do you tell them in a way that's surreptitious, casual? Or do you, just let everyone know at that moment? Sometimes you can't help it, because if it's in the wrong key, oh my goodness, that's painful, especially if someone has perfect pitch. A lot of times musicians have a intuitive compassion for their bandmate, to be helpful instead of point out the mistake. When you are, it also depends on your level of maturity about where someone could be in relation to where they should or shouldn't be. So it's not improvisation at that point. So improvisation is a deliberate focus to change something in a creative sense. Happy birthday to you. happy birthday to you, right? Is happy birthday to you, right? Would be the straight way. The first way I did it would, when I would swing it, you know, or I'm improvising the melody a little bit, I'm improvising the rhythm a little bit. That would be considered improvisation. But if we were singing Star Spangled Banner and the orchestra is in one key and I'm in another key because my ear is faulty or the equipment is faulty and I don't really hear properly, there's not an improvisation, there's not an element of improvisation that you could really incorporate, but you could have you would want to have the certain kind of professionalism where you would go to the key where everyone else is and not like have 125 people come to the key where you are. Does that give you a little bit of insight? Okay, thank you for the question. Yes.
During the talk, I missed a lot of details
Mhm.
that I thought there.
Mhm.
So my idea of improvisation was to stick to the format.
Your idea of improvisation is to stick to the core.
The core message.
Yes.
So is it in music improvisation? Is it similar like you can go off, but you have to have a common theme that all the musicians are sharing, so that you know what's the common theme and you can kind of get off and then go back to the theme, or you can totally take it off?
Really great question. Okay, let's demonstrate. Everyone knows happy birthday, yeah? Sing with me. Let's get this key right here. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Keep singing. I'm gonna sing after and before the notes they pick. Birthday to you. Keep singing or it won't work. Birthday. Double betty ah. Bladun dada, bladun happy birthday to you, do you see what I mean? Yeah. So in order for improvisation to work, there is an assumption that the sameness is happening and you can veer away from it based on your knowledge, your experience, your bravery, your openness, your vulnerability. So if I were going to take that to a social setting, right, for communication, and I am among peers, we're all at a conference and a few people around me, you know how at a conference you may start to talk to your neighbors and we all want to go grab lunch, but we don't want the lunch that they're giving us. So we don't necessarily know each other well to have side conversations, but maybe one or two people do. So maybe there's 6 of us. And we're all sitting at the table, beginning our lunch. And so I start talking to Angela and say, wow, I really like those glasses. Did you get them? Where'd you get them? Warby Parker? Because they look like some ones I have. So we're talking. But the other 4 people at the table are just like looking at the menu. They're not necessarily participating, but we are having some engagement, right? I've become aware of her and I am interacting with her. And then, I'm sorry, tell me your name. Yeah, Yvonne, right? But then Yvonne hears us talking and she jumps in. And so now we start to kind of riff about the glasses, but the other 3 people aren't engaging in that part of the conversation. So we talk a little bit more about the glasses and the other 3 people hear us talking, but don't necessarily feel like they're interested in joining. So on a bandstand, that would be like the trumpet player is soloing and the piano player and the bass player are kind of helping Angela with her part of the musical conversation. But then the drummer feels like they're left out. They don't want to talk about glasses, but they go, dang, dang, and bring the attention to themselves. So that's like the person at the table that goes, oh my God, they don't have hummus, right? And so we do that socially. Like we sometimes exclude people from the joint conversation who knows what we're thinking at the moment. But you notice that sometimes people are connectors. So they'll be in the group and they make sure everyone at the party knows each other and meets each other. Yvonne, oh my God, I love your hair. How did you get those curls in that hair? Because I can't get that to do. My husband calls me like things about my hair, right? What do you use, right? And so and she'll say, oh, I use, I don't know, Sheba oil. And I'll see someone over there who has the same. I said, do you know that Yvonne uses Sheba oil? Right? So there are people that we know like that. Those are communication skills that are based on a kind of intercultural maturity that we all want to gain. And sometimes we just don't identify that that's what it is. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. In the interest of time.
Thank you very much. It was my honor to be here. I appreciate it. All on the committee. What you call it, the keynote committee?
Yeah.
SGF. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciated being with you.
Reception outside with food and beverages, so feel free to just head right out the doors and mingle with the speakers, keynote.
Hi, I am the back to school presentation. If you were in the first half of presenters, if I can
Everyone else, thank you for coming and we'll see you next year. So much. Sorry, we didn't have our water.
Oh, no, I brought water because I know to do that. And I could have sworn I put it in the bag. And I slipped out of the
Back to stuff outside.
I have this truck. Silly boys truck you could throw.
We have our backup here, we currently in the back is with the graduate school.
With the long.
Yep, and then Rachel here's on our organizing committee. I want to. I was gonna see if you. Okay. Yeah, catering looks like it went.
It's such a.
Yeah, so it's good. And then.
Nice to meet you. I'm Gracie. Hi, Gracie. I really loved your talk.
Oh, thank you.
I think that it's so interesting because I'm a singer and a musician, and I remember like I started playing violin, so like classical